man especially, let's try not to jog the baristi and because it's boiling water. So after we've steeped the coffee, we will typically leave the coffee in the bowl for 5 minutes now to brew. And it's at this stage and the next stage that we also start to appreciate what we call the wet aroma. So before it was the dry fragrance, now it's the wet aroma. Because at every stage of the process, remember what we're trying to figure out is if there's anything wrong with the coffee. Okay?
And just to clarify, this is not coffee meant for, at this stage, for steeping. It's not a coffee meant for drinking either, is it?
Exactly, very, very good point. This is not, the purpose of this is not to appreciate the coffee and enjoy it. It's a simple process to check the quality of it. So the way the coffee will have been prepared, I roasted, the way it's been ground, is all done specifically for this process. So, yeah, I don't recommend you going home and because it's not the ideal way of drinking. So we're just waiting for everybody's coffee to be wet. It will obviously take some minutes.
In Gennaro, also at the same time, as we got the ground beans, is there a preference particularly for the grinding of the beans that you recommend here in Costa Coffee?
You mean in the stores or this process?
In this process and in the stores,
yeah.
Yes.
So in this process, the coffee will have been ground to a much coarser level than you would be used to in the store. The size of the coffee, the size of the grind of coffee needs to be proportional to the amount of time the coffee is in contact with the water. Okay, this is a general rule, especially if you're preparing coffee at home, to ensure that you extract the desirable compounds from the coffee and you eliminate and avoid some of the undesirable compounds coming out. You do that by grinding the coffee to the right size in proportion to the amount of time it's dwelling in the coffee. So what we mean by that is, let's take the slowest process, like a cafetiere. A cafetiere French plunge, where the coffee and the water are together for a very long time. You tend to grind the coffee a lot coarser than you possibly would for a filter coffee, where the water is being dripped through. A filter grind will be slightly finer than a cafetiere, and then guess what? Where the coffee and the water are in contact for such a short period of time, the grind is much, much finer. Because you need to increase the surface area of the coffee to ensure that in that short period of time, the water hits as much of the coffee as possible to dissolve the essential oils away from the coffee, and so that you end up with more soluble solids as possible. There's an additional thing with espresso machine, because everything I've mentioned so far has just to do with gravity and water temperature. But there's one extra element in espresso coffee that no other brewing method, traditional brewing method, bar any of the new waves that are happening now, and that's pressure. So the 9 bars, the 9 atmospheres of pressure that the espresso machine is adding to the coffee is pulling and extracting even more soluble solids. Hence why an espresso coffee is, using lay terms, is the strongest of all the extractions. It's the one that has pulled out the most soluble solids. And it's the richer, it's the most volatile. When extracting the same coffee through an espresso machine, you typically magnify the flavors and aromas by 10 times. That's what an espresso machine, in essence, is doing.
I can see with the mechanics engineering background that coffee
I can get too technical sometimes.
No, but that's interesting. So let's say, for example, just for us at home, I guess the amount of grinding you need depends on how soon you drink the coffee, I guess.
Yeah, so exactly. At home, I mean, at home, a lot of people ask me, what should I be doing at home? What am I doing wrong? But I think the first thing I say to people is, don't be scared. You know, a lot of people think that what they've read and what they've seen, they go home and you can replicate immediately. But actually, what I think is a wonderful thing about coffee, because it's a natural product, it will never be the same from one moment to the next. So you have to experiment, you have to try. And you need coffee to make coffee. Don't be prudent when extracting. Use coffee. If then it's too much for you and it's under extracted, then you can pull back. But the biggest mistake people do is to not use enough coffee, not use water at the right temperature, and not be brave enough to experiment.
And nowadays, people, there's a big trend nowadays, or fad, where people do single origin coffees versus doing coffees where, of course, you have a mix of the different beans over there. What's your take on this one?
Fantastic, superb. Because I think with single origin coffees, if there's a certain particular characteristic that you may like. So, for example, I do like acidity in coffee, in proportion. A lot of people don't, and I understand why. I also like very sweet notes. There are certain coffees that are sweeter than others. And there are certain coffees, depending on how, especially how they've been roasted, can be more bitter than others. Going down the single origin route, you can actually then select one of those particular characteristics that you most like, and you can stick with it. And I think after today, some people will leave here actually taking more of a liking and more of a preference to one of these three origins. Some people will leave here having preferred the toasted sweet notes from the Colombia. Some people will leave here winey, berry, citrus notes from the Kenya. And some people say, do you know what, actually, Indonesian tastes more like what I'm used to. It has some of the bolder, deeper, more bitter notes from what I like. And that is why I like single origin coffees.
And I guess, Gennaro, are we going to learn today how to actually mix the coffees in a specific proportion to create a taste of the coffee?
We can have a play, but we haven't set this up to do so. But
Okay.
yeah, we can have a play. So moving on. So in front of you, you now have two. One of them is empty, which we'll be using in a minute for a specific reason, which I'll show you. And the other cup is half full of hot water. So what we do now, you have in front of you 3 spoons. You have 1 spoon, which looks more like my one. Unfortunately, the spoon you have in front of you isn't 7,000 pesos, like this one. But yours should have 3 spoons roughly looking like this.
That's a coffee spoon. What do you call this spoon?
This is a cupping spoon. This is a traditional Colombian cupping spoon. It's made of silver, 925 silver. Yeah.
The closest equivalent. There's the Colombian coffee spoon over here.
And the reason we use a cupping spoon in coffee is because, number one, the silver allows us to move the spoon to the position we prefer.